Audio Renaissance presents The Emotional Intelligence QuickBook by Travis Bradberry and Gene Greaves. Read for you by Tom Pinto.
Forward. Not education, not experience, not knowledge or intellectual horsepower. None of these serve as an adequate predictor of why one person succeeds and another doesn't. There is something else going on that society doesn't seem to account for. We see examples of this every day in our workplaces, homes, churches, schools, and neighborhoods. We observe supposedly brilliant and well-educated people struggle, while others with fewer obvious skills or attributes flourish. And we ask ourselves, why? The answer almost always has to do with this concept called emotional intelligence. And while it is harder to identify and measure than IQ or experience, and certainly more difficult to capture on a resume, its power cannot be denied. And by now, it's not exactly a secret. People have been talking about emotional intelligence for a while, but somehow they haven't been able to harness its power. After all, as a society, we continue to focus most of our self-improvement energy in the pursuit of knowledge, experience, intelligence, and education, which would be fine if we could honestly say we had a full understanding of our emotions, not to mention the emotions of others, and how they influence our lives so fundamentally every day. I think the reason for this gap between the popularity of emotional intelligence as a concept and its application in society is twofold. First, people just don't understand it. They often mistake emotional intelligence for a form of charisma or gregariousness. Second, they don't see it as something that can be improved. Either you have it or you don't. And that's why this is such a helpful book. By understanding what emotional intelligence really is and how we can manage it in our lives, we can begin to leverage all of that intelligence, education, and experience we've been storing up all these years. So whether you've been wondering about emotional intelligence for years or know nothing about it, this book can drastically change the way you think about success. You might want to read it twice. Patrick Lencioni, author of The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, president of the Table Group.
1. What is emotional intelligence really? Chapter 1. The Discovery. Phineas Gage. A tragic accident uncovers the secrets of emotional intelligence. EQ. Should you think these remarks of sufficient importance to deserve a place in your journal, they are at your service. Dr. John Harlow, to the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal, 1848. It was frigid and damp at dawn the last day Phineas Gage arrived to work on time. As he shoved his hands in the pockets of his jacket and cut through the cold, he contemplated the challenges that lay ahead in the building of the Burlington Railroad through Vermont. In the 18 months he'd served as foreman, the crew had made considerable progress, but the terrain they were now forced to conquer was rocky and unforgiving. The early dawn light, softened by the moisture in the air, scarcely lit the winding path to the job site. The distant rhythm of iron sledgehammers thumping in sequence was soothing and forced an early morning smile from Phineas's lips. His crew was on the job a full 15 minutes before the first whistle. Phineas had earned a reputation as the most efficient and capable foreman in the company. The discipline and passion he brought to the site ensured that projects were completed on time, and the social niceties he espoused made him a favorite with the men he supervised. A shrewd, smart businessman, he walked his talk, avoided the alluring depravity of the local saloon, and got along famously with family and friends. The day wore on with the usual efficiency. Yard by yard, Phineas and his crew laid tracks, blasting through the rugged terrain in the quest to speed travel for busy commuters. By the time he glanced at his watch at 4:30, they had added half a mile to the rail line. With skill, Phineas thrust his tamping iron into the angled blasting hole and entertained thoughts of the day he had retrieved this special rod from the local blacksmith. The brawny craftsman had explained to Phineas, with uncharacteristic glee, that this iron was unlike any other he had ever seen. Before taking the next swing in his daily exercise of geometry and strength, Phineas signaled his assistant to pour sand into the blasting hole. The layer of sand would protect the powder from exploding prematurely, while he packed it with the tamping iron. As Phineas reared back to swing, he was startled by a shrill racket behind him. Peering over his right shoulder, he saw that the crew in the pit had knocked over a large load of boulders they were transferring to a platform car with a crane. Phineas sighed briefly to mourn the setback, then completed his swing with the iron, oblivious to the fact that his assistant had also been distracted by the noise. The assistant had failed to place sand in the hole, and the scrape of Phineas's iron against the rock perimeter of the crevice created a spark big enough to ignite the unprotected powder at the bottom. The raw force of the explosion launched Phineas's tamping iron like a rocket. It pierced his face below his left eye and continued upward through the top of his head and beyond. The iron finally settled in the weeds 100 feet from the spot where Phineas stood. Phineas's body flew backward from the impact, and he lay silently for a moment, writhing in shock. A thin whisper of air disguised his overwhelming desire to scream. It was all the noise he could force from his lungs. He could feel the wound below his eye, where the 13-pound tamping iron, 43 inches long and a full 1.25 inches in diameter, had thrust itself through his face. He had no sensation of the massive hole the iron had left as it had emerged through the top of his head. The world as he knew it changed forever that afternoon. Phineas's loyal crew rushed to his side and looked into his eyes for any sign of life. They laughed anxiously as Phineas peered up at them and groaned, "I think I'm going to need to see Dr. Harlow." His sense of humor still intact, Phineas let his men load him into an ox cart to take him to town. Sitting upright in the cart on his own, Phineas noticed his assistant walking somberly beside him. He leaned over and made a request typical of any foreman leaving the job site. "Hand me the book, please." Like young boys watching their father perform a Herculean feat of strength, the bemused railroad worker stood in awe as Phineas logged his exit from the job site. At 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, September 13, 1848, just 1 hour after his horrific accident, Phineas Gage stood unassisted on the patio of his home. The local physician, expecting nothing coherent to come from Phineas's lips, asked his crew for a briefing. "Well, here's enough work for you, Doctor," Phineas interrupted before anyone could speak. "The iron entered here and came out my head here." Despite having had the front portion of his brain scooped from his skull, much as you might a hunk of melon from the rind at breakfast, Phineas could think and speak just as he could before the accident. He was treated intensely in the coming weeks by Dr. Harlow, and eventually his physical wounds healed. The accident seemed to leave nothing more than scars and weak vision in his left eye. Phineas's survival and quick recovery baffled his family and friends. But as he tried to return to business as usual, they realized something was hauntingly different. His first peculiar new habit was his temper. He cursed like a sailor and gave conflicting orders that followed his mood. The man who had never arrived late for work was now apathetic about getting the job done. The contractors who had once touted him as their most capable foreman were forced to terminate his employment. During the 11 years Phineas lived after the accident, he was a transformed man. Dr. Harlow's detailed notes describe a pervasive change in his behavior that could only be explained, literally, by the missing pieces of his mind. The effect of the injury appears to have been the destruction of the equilibrium between his intellectual faculties and the animal propensities. He was now capricious, fitful, irreverent, impatient of restraint, vacillating. His physical recovery was complete, but those who knew him as a shrewd, smart, energetic, persistent businessman recognized the change in mental character. The balance of his mind was gone. To put it bluntly, Phineas's emotional intelligence left his head for good the morning of the accident. In removing the front portion of his brain, the tamping iron took with it his ability to turn his impulses and emotions into reasoned action. Phineas was left a walking, talking, sentient being, yet one with very little self-control. Somehow, his intellect remained intact. He could do complicated math problems and understood the logistics of building the railroad. He lived independently, just as he had before the blast. Those he met assumed his rash behavior was just a part of his personality, but previous acquaintances knew differently. They found the new Phineas irrational and erratic. Every urge and feeling seemed to generate impulsive action, and more often than not, it had a disastrous effect on the quality of his life. The path between feeling and reason. Phineas's grisly accident continues to baffle us today. His survival was truly a miracle, and the changes in his behavior teach us more about the brain than the most sophisticated technology available can. Modern devices can map the brain to show which areas are most important for different types of thought, but no mechanical gadget can show how a human will behave without the assistance of the front of his brain. Phineas's mishap is more than a fascinating story to tell around the campfire. It shows us something important about how humans think. The daily challenge of dealing effectively with emotions is a critical part of the human condition. Even people with their brains wholly intact can fall victim to irrational behavior. Unlike Phineas, we have a choice in how we respond to emotions. Each of us takes in information from the world around us through the 5 senses. Everything we see, smell, hear, taste, and touch travels through the body in the form of electric signals. These signals pass from cell to cell until they reach their ultimate destination, the brain. If a mosquito bites you on the leg, that sensation creates signals that must travel to your brain before you are aware of the pest. Our sensations enter the brain in one place at the back, near the spinal cord. Complex rational thinking happens on the opposite side of the brain, at the front, which is the same part that Phineas lost. When the electric signals enter your brain, they must travel all the way across it before you can have your first logical thought about the event. This chasm in the mind between the entry of our senses and reason is a problem because between the two rests the limbic system. This is the area in the brain where emotions are experienced. Signals passing through the limbic system create an emotional reaction to events before they reach the front of the brain. The front of the brain can't stop the emotion felt in the limbic system. Instead, the two areas communicate constantly. This process of communication is the physical source of emotional intelligence. After his accident, poor Phineas was all emotion. In losing the entire front portion of his brain, he lost his ability to reason about and react to his feelings. Indeed, everything he encountered, every experience he had, resulted in a rash emotional response. Phineas had zero ability to manage his feelings or even understand their presence. Every hour of every day, Phineas was overcome by his emotions, much the same way you might be if you were being chased by a tiger or trying to help a drowning child. Our brains are wired to make us emotional creatures. The fact that we experience the emotional response to an event first means that our primary feelings are strong motivators of behavior. Some experiences result in emotions that we are easily aware of. Other times, emotions may seem non-existent. The location of the limbic system ensures that feelings play a role in every facet of our behavior. Billions of microscopic neurons line the road between the rational and emotional centers of the brain. Information travels between them much as cars do on a city street. When you practice emotional intelligence, the traffic flows smoothly in both directions. Increases in the traffic strengthen the connection between the rational and emotional centers of the brain. Your emotional intelligence is greatly affected by your ability to keep this road well traveled. The more you think about what you are feeling and do something productive with that feeling, the more developed this pathway becomes. Some of us struggle along a 2-lane country road, while others have built a 5-lane superhighway. A generous flow of traffic is the cornerstone of a high emotional intelligence. When too little traffic flows in either direction, the behavior that results is ineffective. Why do people spend so much time ignoring their feelings or getting run over by them? Most lapses in emotional intelligence come from a simple lack of understanding. You can discover specific skills that empower the use of smart behavior in the face of challenges. Harnessing the power of emotional intelligence at work and home is no longer a choice. In order to be successful and fulfilled today, you must learn to maximize these skills, for it is those who employ a unique blend of reason and feeling who achieve the greatest results. The other side of SMART. What does emotional intelligence look like? Discovery consists of seeing what everybody has seen and thinking what nobody has thought. Albert von Szent-Györgyi. Lily awoke one sunny Monday morning in San Francisco. She took a shower, got dressed for work, and drank coffee as she read the paper. At times her mind wandered off to thoughts of the rewards of Biotech Bay, the term used to describe the burgeoning biotechnology industry in her area. For many years, Lily had worked for the same company. She had had no complaints in the beginning, but as time had worn on, her job had grown stagnant. Her enthusiasm for creating drugs to fight cancer remained an important part of her life, but there was little else to motivate her. She performed the same tasks week in and week out, with hardly any opportunity to stretch her skills. The longer she stayed in that job, the more she realized there was too little communication from management on the issues that mattered most to the people working there. The team in the lab lamented the absence of any real opportunity for career development inside the company. They were stuck in their places like rats. She longed for the chance to grow and do new things. She wanted to be challenged by her work once again. For months, her job had provided nothing but frustration. But this day was another story. Lily was starting a new position at a different company. She had made the decision to change jobs 6 weeks prior, when David, her old boss, had invited her to join him in a small startup. He had left her previous employer frustrated by the direction the company was headed in. He had convinced her that the new venture would bring her ideas to life in bold new ways. As Lily flipped open the newspaper to the business section, she suddenly lost her train of thought. A huge graph of her previous employer's plummeting stock price glared at her from the page. She glanced at her watch, grabbed her coffee, and scuttled out the door. Lily's first year at the new company was like a day spent in the big city. It was exciting. There were more things to do than she had time for, and she came home exhausted. Just as David had promised, the company grew underneath her rather than above her. She ran the lab that produced new cancer drugs and was often invited to join in discussions about the company's plans for clinical trials. Lily felt privileged to offer her input into the trials because they would test the effectiveness of new drugs used to treat cancer. David delivered a job with opportunities that were not afforded by Lily's previous employer. By the middle of her second year in the new job, though, things started to fizzle. Her team in the lab got along well and projects moved quickly, but she was bored. She continued to have opportunities to make recommendations to the executive team on how new drugs should be tested through clinical trials. Occasionally, her suggestions were followed, and this made her happy. But the meetings were beginning to look frighteningly similar. She was allowed only a certain level of input into how things should be run. Even as her knowledge became more sophisticated, her best suggestions were ignored. Lily felt frustrated. The executives were doing the important work, planning the drug trials, while she was left to babysit a lab that was essentially running itself. She continued to study the clinical trials, and innovative ideas constantly bubbled to the surface of her thoughts. She could now see major holes in how the company was doing the clinical trials of the drugs. David and the other executives were so busy growing the company that they were missing important opportunities. As time wore on, Lily began to feel as if her voice had been lost. She had more authority than ever, yet she derived little pleasure from performing tasks she had clearly mastered. She felt disregarded by not being invited to provide more input into the design of clinical trials. She knew she had the skills to do more than run the lab, but she wondered if she would be perceived as unappreciative for saying something about it. For months she remained silent and felt stifled by her job. Things got worse when she realized she was mired in the same frustrating muck she had pulled herself out of just a few years prior. Once again, she was dissatisfied with her work. Throughout this period, despite her growing melancholy with her job, Lily remained committed to the mentoring and support David offered. He was busier than ever and sometimes a little distant, but he never denied a request to meet. She regretted her failure to voice her frustration. It was time to be honest with David and see if he could help her. She scheduled a meeting with him and had 2 full weeks in which to prepare. Deep inside, Lily knew something had to change. She did not want to spend her time stalled in the lab, but she saw no obvious position for her skills in the growing company. Lily decided that getting out of the lab was her first priority. She spent the next 2 weeks building the courage to explain her experience to David. Whether her feelings were justified or not, she knew he would listen. Whether or not things would actually change was a different story. If David disagreed with her, the possibility of staying sequestered in the lab was not a welcome thought. During the meeting, Lily sat stiff in her chair. She cleared her throat and nervously explained to David that she had a growing distaste for the limits of her current job. She was quick to point out that she loved the company and appreciated the opportunity, but the last several months had left her feeling stifled. Lily paused for a moment and then told David she wanted to transition out of the lab. Silence fell over the room. For what seemed like an eternity, David did not say a word. He remained in his chair and seemed to look right through her. He was shocked by her revelation and more than a little angry. David felt that Lily held a nice position in a rapidly growing company. She was making double the salary she had at her previous job. He did a pretty good job of hiding his anger, and Lily found it hard to tell what he was thinking. To break the awkward silence, Lily raised the report she held in her lap and placed it on his desk. Flipping maniacally through the pages, she highlighted the finer points of her analysis of the flaws in the company's current drug trials. She offered her suggestions for improving the trials and explained that these mistakes were costing the company money. She finished by pointing out 3 weak points that suggested that the company's current trials could fail prematurely. A failed drug trial would cost the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. She could see that David was impressed. After another torturous lull, he made it clear that he had had no idea she was so unhappy with her job. He lamented that the growth of the business had prevented him from checking in with her as much as he would have liked. He also told her that though the report was impressive, he could not promise anything. It was up to the entire executive team to decide if she should transition to a new job overseeing the company's clinical trials of new drugs. Now it was Lily's turn to look pensive. Did he just say a new position overseeing the company's clinical trials? He had, and later that week, he made the recommendation to the rest of the executive team. His suggestion was approved on a probationary basis. 6 months later, Lily's squeaky clean efficiency running the trials earned her the title of director and an increase in benefits. The increased compensation and latitude to apply her insights made her feel great. Ironically, the moment in that conversation that stuck with her for years to come was David's comment at the end of the meeting that he admired her courage for trusting her gut and facing the situation directly. This from a guy who had walked away from a $250,000 salary to start a company with his life savings. Lily later discovered the role emotional intelligence had played in her successful navigation of this difficult situation. She reviewed the experience with an executive coach and explored the specific actions she had taken to get results. Her coach showed her how she had taken advantage of all 4 emotional intelligence skills: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Like most people who explore their emotional intelligence, Lily liked the fact that she could break her emotional intelligence down into 4 unique parts. Together, the 4 skills define our ability to recognize and understand emotions, as well as our ability to use this awareness to manage our behavior and our relationships. The 4-skill model was introduced by Daniel Goleman, Richard Boyatzis, and Annie McKee in their 2002 book, Primal Leadership. It serves as the benchmark for how people understand and discuss emotional intelligence today. And throughout this audiobook, we describe emotional intelligence using these 4 labels. Like Lily and so many others we've worked with, we're certain you will find it to be an accurate description of the 4 components of emotional intelligence. Together, these skills capture the side of life that typical smarts cannot. Lily used the first emotional intelligence skill, self-awareness, by taking an objective look at her situation. It was painful to realize she was as frustrated and stuck in her new job as she had been in her previous employer. Once she admitted this to herself and took the time to understand her feelings, she had all the information she needed to make a change. Lily then used her awareness of her situation to fuel action. She used the second emotional intelligence skill, self-management, to develop a sound plan and execute it. Evenings sacrificed to work on the report, moments of growing self-doubt, and walking into David's office to face him that day were all challenges she had to overcome by managing her emotions. She fulfilled her strategy by dealing with the negative emotions that surfaced throughout the process and continuing on toward her goal. Lily took time before the meeting to practice the third emotional intelligence skill, social awareness, and consider how things might look from David's viewpoint. This convinced her to create the report. She realized that he could not see all of the ideas in her head, no matter how compelling they might be, so she created a clear way for him to understand her thinking. She then used the fourth emotional intelligence skill, relationship management, to seal the deal and get results. No one else was going to fix things for her, but she knew David could help. She showed trust in their relationship and went to him directly with her problem. As Lily compared her actions in this situation to others from her past, she realized the influence her exercise of emotional intelligence had had on the successful outcome. Though she didn't know she was using emotional intelligence skills at the time, staying true to her feelings, doing her homework, and trusting in her relationship with David worked to her benefit. On the flip side, she could think of other opportunities she had missed because she hadn't done the same thing. In discovering her emotional intelligence with the help of her coach, Lily learned ways to identify these skills and magnify them in the future. A window on emotional intelligence. Descriptions of emotional intelligence are as old as accounts of human behavior. In both testaments of the Bible, to the Greek philosophers, Shakespeare, Thomas Jefferson, and modern psychology, the emotional aspect of reason has been discussed as a fundamental element of human nature. People who hone their emotional intelligence have the unique ability to flourish where others flounder. Emotional intelligence is the something in each of us that is a bit intangible. It defines how we manage behavior, navigate social complexities, and make personal decisions that achieve positive results. In the early 1900s, a new movement emerged that sought to measure cognitive intelligence, IQ. Early scientists explored IQ as a quick method of separating average performers from excellent ones. They soon discovered limitations in this approach. Many people were incredibly intelligent, good at reading, writing, and arithmetic, but limited by their ability to manage their behavior and get along well with others. They also found people who excelled in life despite having average intelligence. E.L. Thorndike, a professor at Columbia University, was the first to give emotional intelligence skills a name. His term, social intelligence, reflected the ability of individuals possessing these skills to get along well with other people. It wasn't until the 1980s that emotional intelligence, EQ, took on its current name. Powerful research soon followed, including a series of studies at Yale University that linked emotional intelligence to personal achievement, happiness, and professional success. The concept of emotional intelligence explained why two people of the same IQ can attain vastly different levels of success in life. Emotional intelligence taps into a fundamental element of human behavior that is distinct from your intellect. There is no known connection between IQ and EQ. You simply can't predict emotional intelligence based on how smart someone is. This is great news because cognitive intelligence, or IQ, is not flexible. Your IQ, short of a traumatic event such as a brain injury, is fixed from birth. You don't get smarter by learning new facts or information. Intelligence is your ability to learn, and it's the same at age 15 as it is at age 50. Emotional intelligence, on the other hand, is a flexible skill that is readily learned. While it is true that some people are naturally more emotionally intelligent than others, a high EQ can be developed even if you aren't born with it. Personality is the final piece in the puzzle. It's the style that defines each of us. Your personality is a result of your preferences, such as your inclination to introversion or extroversion. But like IQ, personality can't be used to predict emotional intelligence. Also like IQ, personality is stable over a lifetime. Personality traits appear early in life, and they don't go away. People often assume that certain traits, for example, extroversion, are associated with a higher emotional intelligence. But those who prefer to be with other people are no more emotionally intelligent than people who prefer to be alone. You can use your personality to assist in developing your emotional intelligence, but the latter isn't dependent on the former. Emotional intelligence is a flexible skill, while personality does not change. IQ, EQ, and personality, assessed together, are the best ways to get a picture of the whole person. When all three are measured in a single individual, they don't overlap much. Instead, each covers unique ground that helps to explain what makes a person tick. The four emotional intelligence skills tend to pair up under two primary competencies: personal competence and social competence. Personal competence is a result of your self-awareness and self-management skills. It's your ability to stay aware of your emotions and manage your behavior and tendencies. Social competence is a result of your social awareness and relationship management skills. It's your ability to understand other people's behavior and motives and manage your relationships. The skills that pair up to form personal and social competence occur together so often that they don't even show up independently in a statistical analysis. You will see that you often use these emotional intelligence skills in tandem. Just like Lily, you will become aware of situations in which a single skill is not enough to get the desired results. Our experience confirms what countless astute audience members have whispered to us after a talk. Don't some of these emotional intelligence skills just end up together? Personal competence. Personal competence is the product of your ability in two important skills: self-awareness and self-management. These skills focus more on you individually than on your interactions with other people. Self-awareness is your ability to accurately perceive your own emotions in the moment and understand your tendencies across situations. Self-awareness includes staying on top of your typical reactions to specific events, challenges, and even people. A keen understanding of your tendencies is important. It facilitates your ability to quickly make sense of your emotions. A high degree of self-awareness requires a willingness to tolerate the discomfort of focusing directly on feelings that may be negative. It is essential to address and understand your positive emotions as well. The only way to genuinely understand your emotions is to spend enough time thinking through them to figure out where they are coming from and why they are there. Emotions always serve a purpose. Because they are reactions to your life experience, they always come from somewhere. Many times they seem to arise out of thin air, and it's important to understand why your current circumstances are important enough to generate a certain reaction in you. People who do this can often cut to the core of a feeling very quickly. Situations that create strong emotions will always require more thought. It was hard for Lily to admit that her new job had turned sour. It took her weeks to realize that she was frustrated that the new job was mirroring the old. This prolonged period of reflection paved the way for constructive change and prevented her from choosing a path that was destructive to her career. Self-management is what happens when you act or do not act. It is dependent on your self-awareness and is the second major piece of personal competence. Self-management is your ability to use your awareness of your emotions to stay flexible and direct your behavior positively. This means managing your emotional reactions to situations and people. Some emotions create a paralyzing fear that makes your thinking so cloudy that the best course of action is nowhere to be found, assuming that there is something you should be doing. In such circumstances, self-management is revealed by your ability to tolerate an exploration of your emotions. Once you understand and build comfort with the breadth of your feelings, the best course of action will show itself. Social competence. Social competence focuses on your ability to understand other people and manage relationships. It is the product of the emotional intelligence skills that come to life in the presence of others, social awareness, and relationship management. Social awareness is your ability to accurately pick up on emotions in other people and understand what is really going on with them. This often means perceiving what other people are thinking and feeling, even if you do not feel the same way. It's easy to get so caught up in your own emotions that you forget to consider the perspective of the other party. Despite Lily's frustration, she used social awareness by taking the time to consider what things must look like from David's chair. Regardless of who was right or wrong, she picked up on his anger and confusion early in the meeting and went right to what she knew would appeal to him, the data she had assembled. Her social awareness opened the door to a successful meeting. Relationship management is the product of the first three emotional intelligence skills: self-awareness, self-management, and social awareness. It's your ability to use your awareness of both your own emotions and those of others to manage interactions successfully. This ensures clear communication and effective handling of conflict. In Lily's meeting, she managed the relationship through her response to David's anger and confusion over her request. She kept things moving forward and controlled the discomfort that so many of us feel when addressing a superior. Relationship management is also the bond you build with others over time. People who manage relationships well are committed to their value and are able to see the benefit of connecting with many different people, even those they are not fond of. Solid relationships are a commodity that should be sought and cherished. They are the result of how you understand people, how you treat them, and the history you share. Lily's story illustrates the good things that can happen when you focus on your emotional intelligence. Her co-workers were surprised by her sudden promotion and admired her courage in creating the opportunity. The depiction of Phineas Gage is an example of a life devoid of emotional intelligence. For the 11 years he survived after the accident, people marveled at the amazing man who was living with a hole in the head, but they did so from a lonely distance. After Phineas died, his headless body was buried in San Francisco's Lone Mountain Cemetery and lay there undisturbed for 100 years. His skull and the tamping iron that traveled through it were placed on display at the Harvard Medical School. In 1940, growing pains in the San Francisco area pressured city officials to move the bodies from the cemetery to create room for housing. The tombstones were dumped into the bay to create a breakwater. Every February since, the same month in which he fell terminally ill, the tombstones have risen from the sand along the beach, exposed by low tide and winter erosion. Among them, a solitary stone bears the name of Phineas Gage. Like his life, it continues to surface as an eerie reminder of the power of emotional intelligence. Chapter 2: Amazing EQ. 500,000 surveys. What do they teach us about the need for emotional intelligence? Emotions have taught mankind to reason. Luc de Vauvenargues. Racing through downtown traffic on a motor scooter is no way to start the day. Louis Sullivan was late for work and dodging between cars like a madman. As if this weren't uncomfortable enough, it was already 100 degrees outside. A red light forced him to stop, and he could feel the oppressive heat radiating from the blacktop through the bottoms of his loafers. The scooter had always been a useful tool when he was running late for work, but today he cursed it. When he pulled up to his building, he couldn't even find a scooter-sized place to park in. Desperate times call for desperate measures, he muttered under his breath as he slammed down the kickstand. He tilted the scooter to rest on the edge of a disabled parking spot in front of the building and scuttled inside. The sweat was already pouring through his shirt when he plopped down at his desk, anticipating another uneventful day. He quickly lost himself in emails and phone calls, and the lunch hour was fast approaching when a coworker leaned over the edge of his cubicle. "There's a tow truck out front, and he's taking your scooter." Lewis leapt from his chair and stormed through the lobby. The sticky August heat was a familiar greeting as he thrust the front doors open and stepped out onto the sidewalk. Sure enough, a bearded man in a navy jumpsuit was kneeling next to his scooter, searching for the proper place to attach it so he could lift it onto the tow truck. Lewis rushed over and begged for his forgiveness. "No can do, my friend," the driver interrupted. "This is a towaway zone." "You don't need to tow it if I'm here to move it," Lewis pleaded to a blank stare. "Rule's a rule. I'm just trying to do my job." The driver sighed and went back to looking underneath the scooter. Lewis's mind flooded with confusion and despair. Getting his scooter out of tow would cost more money than he had earned that week. He could scarcely afford his rent as it was. "Come on, man, can't you see I'm desperate?" The driver glanced up for a moment to greet this comment with a smirk. Tunnel vision set in, and Lewis could now see the crumbs in the driver's beard, probably left over from some seafood special. Of course, he's already had lunch, Lewis thought to himself. Why would he have to wait until noon like the rest of us? He jammed his hands into his pockets and glanced back at the growing assembly of his co-workers gathered in front of the building to witness the debacle. "Why can't I just pay the fine and keep my scooter?" Lewis demanded. This time the driver began to chuckle. He stood up and faced Lewis to make his point clear. "You just don't get it, do you, buddy?" He extended his left index finger toward the offending vehicle and continued. "Your little scooter here is parked in a handicap spot, and they called me here to tow it away. I'll be damned if I'm going to leave without it." Now Lewis was seeing red. He had had enough. He lurched to his left and with all his might, planted a foot into the passenger's side door of the tow truck. After pausing for a moment to admire the size 11 dent his shoe had left in the metal, he turned to gauge the owner's reaction. The man was standing there laughing. He raised his hand and pointed to the police cruiser parked on the corner. Lewis's blood ran cold. It was the police who had called for a tow, and they were still there, unnoticed by him. The cops fired up their siren and screeched to a halt in front of Lewis. He was so shocked by what was happening that they seemed to come at him in slow motion. Many of Lewis's co-workers, including his boss, watched in silence as the police cuffed him, read him his rights, and then ducked him into the back of the squad car. When his girlfriend bailed him out of jail that evening, she had all of his belongings in the trunk of her Hyundai. As if getting arrested and fired in a single day weren't bad enough, she broke up with him immediately as a result of his irrational behavior. Lewis's difficulty understanding and controlling his emotions, though dramatic, is not uncommon. People overrun by intense emotions often make difficult situations worse. Over the last decade, we've tested more than 500,000 people to explore the role emotions play in daily living and learn what works and what doesn't in the face of challenges. The results are astounding. Our database contains 25 million answers to the most critical questions facing people today. We've learned how people see themselves versus what others see in them. And we've observed how various choices affect personal and professional success. Our findings pinpoint 3 simple truths that capture the essence of emotional intelligence. Finding number 1. We have an emotional epidemic. Despite the growing focus on emotions and emotional intelligence during the last 2 decades, the global deficit in understanding and managing emotions is startling. Only 36% of the people we tested are able to accurately identify their emotions as they happen. This means that 2/3 of us are typically controlled by our emotions and are not yet skilled at spotting them and using them to our benefit. Emotional awareness and understanding are not taught in school. We enter the workforce knowing how to read, write, and report on bodies of knowledge, but too often we lack the skills to manage our emotions in the heat of the challenging problems we will face. Good decisions require far more than factual knowledge. They are made using self-knowledge and emotional mastery when they're needed most. Stress and interpersonal conflict are glaring evidence of the trouble most people have understanding and managing their emotions. More than 70% of those we tested have difficulty handling stress, and some of the most challenging circumstances they face are at work. Conflicts at work tend to fester as people passively avoid problems or confront them so aggressively that situations are blown out of proportion. Most organizations perpetuate an environment that stifles emotional intelligence. They lose sight of the very people who keep the dollars coming in. Only 15% of workers we surveyed feel strongly that they are respected and valued by their employer. 4 out of every 5 people would be likely to leave their current job if offered similar pay and position elsewhere. People want more than a paycheck for coming to work. They want to know that their efforts are valued, and the sacrifices they make for their employer are appreciated. Finding number 2. There are few truths behind labels. Gender is a common framework for assigning labels to emotion. Such generalizations have pegged women as everything from the fairer sex to overly emotional, and men from emotionally aloof to explosive. Our analysis of emotional intelligence by gender suggests something different. Women, on average, have an overall emotional intelligence score that is 4 points higher than men's. This difference is large enough to suggest that women typically express, not to be confused with possess, more skill in using emotions to their benefit. Women outscore men in 3 of the 4 emotional intelligence skills, including self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Self-awareness is the only skill for which the scores are equal by gender. The largest gap occurs in relationship management, with women scoring a full 10 points higher than men. One thing data can't provide is interpretation. We imagine that women are expected to practice emotional intelligence from childhood. Many of the pretend games young girls play involve acting out feelings and social niceties. Boys aren't rewarded for the same behavior. People often assume that there are vast differences in emotional intelligence between members of different professions. Engineers, accountants, and scientists are often believed to have low emotional intelligence. But analysis of our global database produces dramatic, counterintuitive findings. First, there is essentially no difference among the average scores of various professions. Persons working in fields as diverse as sales, IT, finance, operations, and marketing have an average emotional intelligence score that is nearly identical. The gap in emotional intelligence scores among these professions is less than 1 point. The only group of people who tend to score higher than others are those working in customer service. It appears that a slightly higher level of emotional intelligence is required to survive in this profession. Consider what it's like to deal with disgruntled customers all day long, and you'll see why emotional intelligence is essential. The only group that scores a great deal lower than the other professions is the group whose members have no profession at all, the unemployed. Finding number 3. It's lonely at the top. The relationship between emotional intelligence and job title is the most dramatic. Scores climb with titles from the bottom of the corporate ladder upward toward middle management. Middle managers stand out with the highest emotional intelligence scores in the workforce. But up beyond middle management, there is a steep downward trend in emotional intelligence scores. For the titles of director and above, scores descend faster than a skier on a black diamond. CEOs, on average, have the lowest emotional intelligence scores. Business journals often say that the higher your job title, the less real work you do. Your primary function is to get work done by other people. You might think, then, that the higher the position, the better the people skills. It appears that the opposite is true. Too many leaders are promoted because of what they know or how long they have worked, rather than for their skill in managing others. Once they reach the top, they actually spend less time interacting with staff. Yet among executives, those with the highest emotional intelligence scores are the best performers. We've found that emotional intelligence skills are more important to job performance than any other leadership skill. The same holds true for every job title. Those with the highest emotional intelligence scores within any position outperform their peers. The impact of emotional intelligence. How does emotional intelligence affect your health and happiness? Even a blind pig in a blizzard finds an acorn once in a while. Anonymous. The public knew from day one that making the Magic Hour a hit was going to be a challenge. Magic Johnson, though an eminently popular celebrity, had made his 13-year career with the Los Angeles Lakers legendary by sinking stylish layups at the buzzer, not making jokes on television. The public knew it, the executives at Fox knew it, even Magic Johnson knew it. A rarely mentioned element of late-night talk shows is the support staff of comedians, who provide the secret ingredient of success. Craig Shoemaker was beaming when he was offered this job on the new show to feature Magic Johnson. Telling jokes with Magic sounded a heck of a lot better than the gig he had on a game show, and he promptly quit. When he joined the planning for the production, he was told he would sit next to Magic on the couch, feeding and receiving lines to keep things lively. And why shouldn't he? Craig had been voted Best Stand-Up at the 1997 American Comedy Awards, had hosted a program on VH1, and was considered a premier comedian by many in the business. The producers figured that a single day of rehearsal before shooting would be enough time for Magic and Craig to build chemistry. It wasn't. Shoemaker worried that their lack of preparation was a recipe for disaster. He made the most of the single rehearsal and developed some chemistry with Magic during unscripted moments. He remained both optimistic and apprehensive about the show's launch. The Magic Hour premiered on June 8, 1999, to subpar Nielsen ratings. To Craig's horror, he was handed a list of jokes and instructed to deliver them on cue. With all opportunity for spontaneity pulled out from under him, his bits were painful and the show garnered horrendous reviews. Craig worked hard between episodes to create funny jokes and skits that the producers would let him use on air. He clung to the hope of redeeming himself, but his attempts were repeatedly ignored. The scripted, crude jokes embarrassed him, and his hope quickly morphed into frustration. Craig never mustered the courage to jump ship, and shooting the next 15 episodes was an absolute nightmare. Today, Craig is the first to admit that he was afraid to follow his gut. His excitement over the initial opportunity with the program made him immune to the warning signs staring him in the face. He told himself that things would change and waited for them to improve. They didn't. Even Magic Johnson, the king of the assist in the NBA, couldn't save Craig from the atrocious humor he had to read from the script. Craig describes his remaining time on set like being in a jet that has suddenly lost cabin pressure at 30,000 feet. The jokes they had me telling were so bad, there should have been oxygen masks falling out of the ceiling for the audience members. It was absolutely terrible. Just weeks into the job, he knew he should bail out, but he felt too paralyzed to walk away. A $10 million loss forced Fox executives to pull the plug on the program after just 8 weeks. Craig's time spent on the Magic Hour put a noticeable dent in his career. "I was hoping to have that job title removed from my resume," he joked recently during a radio interview. "They called me everything from co-host to sidekick to writer to you're out of here." Always the comedian, he can laugh about it now, but the progress he's made in the 7 years since the show ended was slow to start. A comedian fired from a bad show is not a hot commodity in Hollywood. He has since returned successfully to television and is thankfully a lot wiser about his feelings. He knows he'll be courageous and trust his gut the next time he sees the writing on the wall. Emotional intelligence and health. There is a time in the life of every predicament where it is ripe for resolution. Your emotions provide you with a cue to act when a problem is big enough to see, yet still small enough to solve. By understanding your emotions, you can move adeptly through your current challenges and prevent future ones. When you do the opposite and repress your feelings, they quickly build into the uncomfortable sensations of tension, stress, and anxiety. Unaddressed emotions strain the mind and body. Your emotional intelligence skills help make stress more manageable by enabling you to tackle tough situations before they become unmanageable. People who fail to use their emotional intelligence skills are more likely to turn to other, less effective means of managing their moods. They are twice as likely to experience anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and even thoughts of suicide. Emotional intelligence has a tremendous impact on people's happiness and contentment. People who practice emotional intelligence tend to be more at ease with their surroundings and comfortable in their own skin. The direct connection between emotional intelligence and a sense of well-being underscores how critical it is that we notice our emotions, remain aware of them, and use them to guide our behavior. The more you exercise your emotional intelligence skills, the more you will get out of life. Scores of recent research studies have indicated an important link between emotional intelligence and susceptibility to disease. Stress, anxiety, and depression suppress the immune system, creating a vulnerability to everything from the common cold to cancer. The potency of your immune system is tied to your emotional state via neuropeptides, complex chemicals that act as messengers between the mind and body. When your mind is flooded with tension or distress, it signals the body to decrease the energy it expends to fight disease. This increases your vulnerability to illness, and medical schools and continuing education programs for physicians are rushing to add this discovery to their curricula. New medical research shows a definitive link between emotional distress and serious forms of illness, such as cancer. One of the first long-term studies measured women's stress levels from 1968 to 1991. Researchers tracked the degree to which each woman experienced tension, fear, anxiety, and sleep disturbances, all resulting from conflicts at work and home. Women who experienced higher levels of stress during this 24-year period were twice as likely to develop breast cancer. The emotional distress these women experienced resulted from unresolved conflicts and unmanaged emotions. Emotional intelligence skills can also help speed the body's recovery from disease. People who develop their emotional intelligence skills during treatment recover faster from a variety of ailments, including the two biggest killers in America, heart disease and cancer. Teaching emotional intelligence skills to people with life-threatening illnesses has been shown to reduce their rate of recurrence, lessen recovery times, and lower death rates. When individuals are diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, such as cancer, they often feel an increase in stress and anxiety in response to the diagnosis. The illness is usually the biggest challenge the patient has ever faced, and she often needs new skills to cope with the associated stress and uncertainty. For example, a third of all women diagnosed with breast cancer suffer a bout of clinically diagnosable anxiety upon diagnosis, and up to 10% suffer from post-traumatic stress. Researchers at Ohio State University studied 227 women diagnosed with breast cancer and saw remarkable effects from teaching emotional intelligence skills during recovery. Women who were randomly assigned to this treatment had reduced levels of stress, kept to a better diet, and developed stronger immune systems. Research presented to the American Heart Association revealed a similar outcome for men and women taught emotional intelligence skills while recovering from a heart attack. Emotional intelligence has a strong influence on health-related outcomes because it reduces stress in the face of trying situations. Life-threatening illnesses, in particular, arouse intense fear and apprehension that must be addressed and understood by the patient for his benefit. The physical impact of emotional intelligence is so strong that studies at the Harvard Medical School have actually mapped physical differences in the brain based on changes in emotional intelligence. In these studies, the amount of traffic flowing between the rational and emotional centers of the brain was found to have a real impact on their size and structure. Emotional intelligence skills strengthen your brain's ability to cope with emotional distress. This resilience keeps your immune system strong and helps protect you from disease. Emotional intelligence and professional excellence. How much impact does the exercise of emotional intelligence have on professional success? The short answer is, a lot. It's a powerful way to focus your energy in one direction with a tremendous result. We've tested emotional intelligence alongside 33 other important workplace behaviors and found that it subsumes the majority of them, including time management, motivation, vision, and communication. You can use your emotional intelligence to boost your job performance in a variety of ways. It's so critical to success that it accounts for 60% of performance in all types of jobs. It's the single biggest predictor of performance in the workplace, and the strongest driver of leadership and personal excellence. Perhaps the best thing about emotional intelligence is that it's a highly flexible skill. No matter whether people measure high or low in this ability, they can work to improve it, and those who score low can actually catch up to their coworkers. Research conducted at the Business School at the University of Queensland in Australia discovered that people who are low in emotional intelligence and job performance can match their colleagues who excel in both, solely by working to improve their emotional intelligence. Of all the people we've studied at work, we have found that 90% of high performers are also high in emotional intelligence. On the flip side, just 20% of low performers are high in emotional intelligence. You can be a high performer without emotional intelligence, but the chances are slim. People who develop their emotional intelligence tend to be successful on the job because the two go hand in hand. These findings hold true for people in all industries, at all levels, in every region of the world. We haven't yet been able to find a job in which performance isn't tied to emotional intelligence. Organizations as a whole also benefit from emotional intelligence. When the skills of thousands of people in a single company are increased, the business itself leaps forward. Emotional intelligence skills drive leadership, teamwork, and customer service. Organizations as varied as L'Oreal and the U.S. Air Force have saved millions of dollars by instituting programs targeting emotional intelligence skills. We often see a contagious frenzy when companies introduce emotional intelligence to employees. One of our Fortune 500 clients posted an offer on its intranet inviting employees to test their emotional intelligence and complete a training program online. People in human resources were floored when they received hundreds of responses each day. The emotional intelligence program became a word-of-mouth phenomenon. Let's face it, training programs can be pretty boring. Too many times employees attend programs they consider nothing more than a nuisance. If a company can generate contagious energy around a single concept, it fuels a culture in which people can thrive. When people build their emotional intelligence, they perform better, treat one another better, and get more out of going to work. It helps create an environment in which everybody wins.